First we had the Moon Swatch, now we have the Blancpain Swatch thing. So let's talk about it. It was 2 years ago when the Moon Swatch came out. It was groundbreaking. You had a high-end brand that never sold anything under a certain price point, selling a watch for about $260, and people lost their minds, especially because it was a model that people are excited about. People flock to. The Moon Watch itself is a watch I owned and a watch that a lot of people own. It's a watch that gets a lot of press, a lot of interest, a lot of everything. And so when they made a more affordable version of it, people were really excited, and you had people that couldn't afford or didn't want to buy a Moon Watch going out to buy a Moon Swatch. And you had people buying it at the stores because you could only buy it at the stores, and then reselling it on eBay for inflated prices. So I got my hands on the Blancpain Swatch. I have different thoughts, and I want to walk through those. And this is going to be a very honest take. There are things I really do not like about the concept of these, and there are things that I really do like about the concept of this and the design. And so I'll walk through all of that, and you can obviously leave your opinions in the comments below. While I don't need to go through too many of the details of the watch, I'll still go through those when we get to the design element. The first thing I want to talk about is what person or what sort of person are they targeting here when it comes to this watch. I'll read you one of the questions that was posted to me asking me about the watch before I did this review. This is M Top. He said, does it make you want a Blancpain more, or instead does it scratch the itch of that aesthetic? Does it make Blancpain more or less appealing to the general buyer? Is Swatch Group creating upgrade pathways or shooting themselves in the foot? Will we see a Breguet Swatch? Is it appealing to others, or is it just awkward to explain to them that it is a cheap version which you overpaid for? And while I think that's a little targeted, I obviously understand the feeling. And so I'll obviously deal with the price point at the end. But the first thing there is just, who is it targeted for? Is this a concept of Blancpain to try and basically funnel people up the pathway into the 50 fathoms? The reason why I say that, when the Moon Swatch originally came out, you had people that were interested in the Moon Watch. Everyone knows that. But this release itself sold a lot of Moon Watches, the high-end version. So people would go out, buy this, or they'd learn about the Moon Watch just from, getting bombarded with the Moon Swatch. Then they'd go out and buy the $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 version of the Moon Watch. Obviously using an affordable option to push people into a higher price range based on general awareness, as well as probably a little bit of buyer sentiment. Is someone going to be the kind of person that buys a $260 quartz version, or are they going to learn about it, like the aesthetic, and think, I should really pull the trigger on that Moon Watch finally? And I guess that's kind of the concept, and it worked. They had Moon Watches and Moon Swatches that sold like crazy. The question is, though, if there's enough people that are interested and aware of the 50 fathoms to buy this. And I think that that is where it's interesting. The intent of this watch, I believe, is mainly to do what I said, basically two things. They're focusing on making a lot of money at the low end for someone that wants to buy something like this, but also using it as a marketing tool, a very cheap and profitable marketing tool to get people more aware and more interested in the 50 fathoms, which has a long history of, it being one of the first dive watches or rotatable bezel style dive watches. It's one of the first, and yet it doesn't get a whole lot of press. It's a great brand. It's got a lot of history. Obviously, it died for a period of time, and then Jean-Claude Biver basically brought it back from the dead. So there's interest there, I think, in theory, of the history of the company, but no experience of wearing the watch, no experience of the design, and not a lot of interest around the design itself. But creating a watch at an affordable price point that is focused around getting people aware of the design and knowing about it, I think, yes, will push people into the higher price category. In my case, though, I think it is closer to the scratch the itch. I don't look at this and think, I really like the design, I need to buy a more expensive version of it. I think, I like the design, that's it, right? But that's just because that's me. If I had more money, if I was very wealthy, I imagine you'd be someone that would buy this, realize, oh, Blancpain 50 Fathoms is a nice watch, I should get interested in that. I bet they made that Swatch version for a reason, and then you go out and buy the 50 Fathoms. It mainly just depends on where you're at price-wise. Are you someone that buys a lot of really expensive watches? If that's the case, you'll probably have multiple of these and then maybe buy a 50 Fathoms. If you're someone that is like me and typically plays in the 10,000 and under, you buy a couple, you typically don't have a huge amount of money in your watch collection, you're someone that might buy one of these, but it's not going to make you more or less inclined to buy the 50 Fathoms. But that's just a question of how much money you have and how much you want to put into your watch collection. I do think it will raise the overall interest level in the 50 Fathoms in general. The second point, design. Now, the design of this watch is classic. It's the 50 Fathoms made out of plastic. So it's very straightforward. You've got a 42 millimeter case. You've got a pretty thick case itself. It's about a little over 14 millimeters thick. You've got a 48 millimeter lug to lug. You have drilled lugs, but they're not really like that useful because there's not a spring bar in there. You know, it's, I think, some sort of like insert that like a rivet kind of that gets pushed in. I have to kind of tinker with it and figure out if I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, please let me know in the comments below, but it looks like it's not a spring bar. It looks like it's just a bar. So that's something to note. There are different models. There are some with a date, 3 that have a date and 2 that do not have a date on it. The 3 that have the date also have the new modern Blancpain logo, and the 2 that do not have the date do not. They have the old style Blancpain logo. The Arctic and the Antarctic are the ones that do not have the date, and those are the ones that I like the best. I like the design. I like the old style logo, especially since it says 50 Fathoms under it. I think it just blends a lot better. And I also like the addition of some sort of complication or aesthetic at 6 o'clock. On the Arctic, it's a radiation little marker, which basically means no radiation. That's to mark that it doesn't have radium lume, which is the way that they had to mark it back in the day. This one is supposed to look like or be a moisture indicator. I do not know if it's actually a moisture indicator, but it's supposed to look like one. Obviously on the case back, you have a see-through case back looking at a 51 part movement called the System 51. So 51 pieces go into it, 19 jewels. The watch itself is very simple. You've got a skeletonized barrel, so you can actually see the mainspring winding up. At least it's what it looks like to me. The case back itself has in there a clear rotor, which then has a marking engraved on it of the sea creature, which is basically what is ever indigenous in each ocean that it's representing. That clear piece of plastic that is moving is the oscillating rotor, and obviously then winds the watch, which I think is actually pretty darn cool. And then obviously inside of there, you can see the balance spinning away. So pretty simple movement, you know, nothing to write home about, but it's nice to see that obviously they did an automatic version because Blancpains have never and will never have a quartz movement. If you know the quote I'm talking about, let me know down below. So when it comes to the design and the feeling of the watch, I will say my pros are gonna be the look, the feel. I like the color palette. I really like the Antarctic a lot. I think the Arctic's a little too orange. You know, the other ones I haven't seen in person, so I wouldn't know, you know, entirely, but I definitely prefer the look of this one. I think the strap is relatively nice, meaning that the strap feels okay. Like it feels relatively soft. Obviously it's a polyester. There's nothing really overly soft. You can buy a seatbelt nylon that feels better than this, but it's not quite as bad as like a tubular nylon that's really stiff. So it's somewhere in between there. The keepers that are on here, as well as the buckle, are also made out of plastic. So that part I do think was a little cheaped out. I get that it matches and, you know, kind of goes with the whole aesthetic, and I kind of like that aspect of it. But the fact that they're plastic makes me very wary about, you know, pulling too hard. The keepers themselves here on the backside of this NATO are really shallow, so it's hard to push the strap back through when you're returning the strap back in, these top 2 keepers. Overall, you know, obviously I much prefer metal. I like metals in general on everything I possibly can rather than plastic, so it's fine, you know, nothing to write home about. It is what it is. The watch itself fits really good. You know, it's a 42 millimeter case with a 48 lug to lug. It's going to fit almost all wrists, especially if you have 6 3/4 like my wrist, all the way up to, you know, 8. You know, I don't know how you feel beyond that. So a good sweet spot for most people. I think you can definitely wear this down to a 6.5, maybe 6 1/4 inch wrist and not have any issues depending on how you like your watches to look. I like the textured dial and the fact that it actually has a little bit of a darker speckled pattern on the outside of the ring moving inward where it starts to get lighter as it comes inward. I think that looks nice. I really didn't notice it until I had it on macro shots, and then I could notice it a lot better. The handset is a nice military look. It looks like the Mil Sub, looks like the 50 Fathoms. Very vintage, has a nice sword pointed hour and minute hand. Seconds hand also has a really cool little white touch on the tip, which I think is a nice addition. Again, you know, we're not writing home about all this stuff, but it's nice to see it. It looks cool. Everything is loomed on there, including the markers on the bezel. All the indices, all the hands are all loomed. Oh, that's nice to see and great from a design element. The crown is also signed with a Blancpain X Swatch logo. And then on the other side of the watch, you have Swatch written on the side of the case. Now, here's where we get into the cons. The Swatch written on the side of the case makes me feel like it's an Invicta. It just does. And I hate that. I really do not like. I know some people don't care or do like that Invicta's written on there, but it's a little too loud. The $400 watch is a lot of money. And if they're going to write Swatch on the side of it, I just feel like they could have probably taken that off. The bezel itself, the rotation's not great. It's just not. You can buy a Seiko for $400. I have a Seiko Turtle in there, which I actually bought for less than this, especially since I bought this at a ridiculously inflated price. That Turtle in there, the Seiko Turtle, has a way better bezel action than this thing does. Very plasticky, very, obviously you can feel each snap, but you can hear it. It's, it's okay. It's a bezel. Especially again on a plastic watch, you get what you pay for. It's a little thick. I don't like that very much. I obviously said I don't like the plastic keepers. Also, do not like the fact that this movement is built to have a date, and because this doesn't have a date, you have a ghost position. It's also interesting, I've never had a System 51. It winds the opposite direction, so you have to rotate the crown counterclockwise for it to wind, or wind the crown towards yourself for it to wind. And then when you pull it out, that first position is a ghost position because I don't have a date wheel on this version. And then after that is obviously the minute and hands. Obviously, it's not a hacking movement. It does have a 90-hour power reserve, but because it's not a hacking movement, you do have that when you go backwards. The seconds hand moves or stops moving and kind of jolts backward. I'll show you some video, you can see what I mean. But obviously, again, you're going to get what you pay for. But the problem here is that like a 7S26 from Seiko feels the same that this does, but you can buy a Seiko 5 made out of metal with a nice bead blasted finish on it in 38 millimeters. And it's about $150 these days, I think. It used to be about $100. I bought my first Seiko 5 for $85 on Amazon. Great watch, great movement, and it felt way more solid than this thing does. This is supposed to emulate a more expensive watch, and because it emulates a brand and a design that's more expensive, they charge more for it. So that goes into the price element. Is it worth $400? Is it worth $800 that you see it on eBay now? No. I think it's mainly targeted right now, especially at $800, at people like myself, content creators. My hobby is this. I talk to you guys about watches that come out, and in order to get my hands on watches that come out, I need to be either right next to a Swatch store, which I don't live anywhere near one because I'm in the middle of the Midwest and flyover country, or I buy it at an inflated price in order to be able to talk about it. So I choose the latter. $800 I think is absurd for this watch. I paid it, still absurd. Does not make sense at all. I would buy a Seiko SPB 143 in a heartbeat, or a Zin model, and I would just be perfectly fine, and you do not need this watch. I'd even buy a Seiko Turtle and be perfectly fine. You don't need this watch. If you have to have the 50 fathoms look, just wait. The prices will go back down. People get sick of the hype. You'll find the color you want in the price that you're really looking to pay. I don't think these things will last at $400. I think the hype is going to die down, and most people are going to be able to pick it up for $300 less, probably, within a couple years. But obviously right now, it is what it is. People are excited about it. People want to talk about it. People like myself want to get their hands on it, and that obviously inflates the price a little bit. Whether or not it's worth that original $400 to you, buying it at retail, is entirely up to you. What your purpose is for it is entirely up to you. If you're going on the merits of what it gives you, every purchase for us human beings is emotional. If you have to have it and you love the look of it, you love the design, you love the collectability and the limited edition, and the fact that this is kind of the new wave of watches in the world right now, go get it, right? That's emotionally, you care about it more, or care about it enough to buy a $400 watch that looks like this, that's made out of plastic. If you don't, I obviously would recommend a watch like a Seiko Turtle, or any of the Seiko model around $400 will last forever. While I love the look of this and I love the design of it, it's a fun watch. It's a very expensive, fun watch. So, however you feel about that and however you feel about how much money they're making on it is up to you. Let me know what you guys think down below, whether or not you think it's worth it, or your thoughts in general. And I'll see you in the next one. Take care.